I became obsessed with finding answers. I scoured news articles, police reports, and anything I could get my hands on about Kyra and Daniel. What had brought her to my room that night? Why had she been so terrified? And why had Daniel, a stranger to both of us, targeted her so brutally? None of it made sense, and the lack of clarity only deepened the pit of unease that had formed in my chest. The police ruled it as a random act of violence, a case of a disturbed individual snapping without clear motive. But I couldn't accept that. The look in Kyra's eyes, the desperation in her voice when she said, "He's watching," lingered in my mind like an unresolved riddle. What had she meant? And who was she talking about? One night, unable to sleep, I went back to the old dorm. It was closed off, but the lock on the back entrance was loose. The building was dark and eerily quiet, the air heavy with the musty scent of abandonment. I found myself standing outside the room where everything had happened. The door was still scarred from where the police had forced it open during their investigation. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it, yet it felt different, colder, darker, as if the very air carried the weight of what had occurred. I sat on the couch where Kyra had taken her last breath, staring out the same window she'd been fixated on that night. For the first time, I noticed something odd. The window faced a grove of trees, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. But beyond the trees, there was a faint glimmer of light, a small cabin, barely visible in the distance. I hadn't noticed it before, and something about it felt out of place. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and dread, I decided to investigate. The path to the cabin was overgrown, branches snagging at my clothes as I made my way through the woods. When I reached it, the cabin looked abandoned, its wooden exterior weathered and covered in moss. But as I approached the door, I saw that it was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The cabin was sparsely furnished, with a small table, a few chairs, and an old iron stove in the corner. But what caught my attention was a wall covered in photographs. I stepped closer, my stomach tightening as I realized what I was looking at. The photos were of Kyra, taken from a distance. There were shots of her walking to class, practicing at the gym, sitting with friends in the cafeteria. Dozens of images, all taken without her knowledge. And then I saw the most chilling photo of all, Kyra standing outside my dorm room. The timestamp on the photo was from the night of her death. My hands trembled as I backed away, my mind racing. Had Daniel taken these photos? Or was someone else involved? Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard a noise behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as I turned around. A figure stood in the doorway, shrouded in shadow. "What are you doing here?" a voice growled. It was Daniel. He must have escaped custody, though I had no idea how. His presence felt suffocating, his gaze piercing through me like a predator sizing up its prey. He stepped closer, and I could see the faint glint of a knife in his hand. I panicked, grabbing the nearest object, a rusted metal pipe, and swung it in his direction. The impact caught him off guard, and he stumbled backward, dropping the knife. I didn't wait to see if he would recover. I ran, crashing through the woods, my heart pounding like a drumbeat in my ears. When I finally reached the campus, I went straight to the authorities. The police launched a search for Daniel and the cabin, but when they arrived, the photos were gone. The cabin itself looked undisturbed, as if no one had been there in years. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I imagined it all? Was the stress and trauma of that night playing tricks on my mind? But the nightmares persisted. Kyra continued to appear in my dreams, her voice growing more urgent. "You have to stop him," she would say. "He's not done." I started noticing things, small, almost imperceptible signs that someone was watching me. A figure in the distance that would vanish when I turned to look. Strange noises outside my window at night. The feeling of being followed whenever I walked across campus. One day, I found a note slipped under my door. It read, "You're next." The message sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I couldn't face this alone anymore. I reached out to Kyra's closest friends, hoping they could shed some light on what she might have been involved in. One of them, a girl named Elise, hesitated before telling me something that sent my mind reeling. She was scared of someone, Elise said. She didn't tell me much, just that she thought someone was following her. She kept saying she saw him everywhere, even in her dreams. She called him the Watcher. The Watcher. The word felt heavy, like it carried a weight I couldn't understand. I started to piece together a theory, though it sounded absurd even to me. What if Kyra's fear had been more than paranoia? What if the Watcher was real? Desperate for answers, I delved into local folklore, searching for any mention of the Watcher. I discovered stories of an entity that haunted the area, described as a shadowy figure that preyed on the vulnerable. The stories were old, passed down through generations, but they all shared a common theme. Once the Watcher marked you, there was no escape. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that Daniel was the only one responsible for Kyra's death. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger, something darker, was at play. The nightmares grew worse. In them, Kyra would reach out to me, her eyes pleading. "He's coming for you," she would whisper. And every time, I would wake up drenched in sweat, her words echoing in my mind. Then, one night, I saw him, standing outside my window, his silhouette barely visible against the darkness. The Watcher. I blinked, and he was gone. But I knew he was real, and I knew my time was running out. One night, I woke up to the sound of knocking. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent a wave of fear through me. My heart raced as I lay there, straining to hear more. Was it my imagination? Or maybe just the old pipes in the building? The sound came again, 3 distinct, deliberate knocks. Summoning all my courage, I got up and opened the door. No one was there. The hallway stretched before me, empty and silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Shaking my head, I closed the door, convincing myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The knocking continued night after night. Each time it came, I would lie awake, paralyzed with fear, unsure if I should investigate or ignore it. It wasn't just me either. Others in my dorm began noticing strange occurrences. Some claimed to hear faint footsteps echoing in the hallways during the early hours, even though everyone was accounted for. Others swore they felt a presence in their rooms, a cold, unshakable feeling of being watched. Then there were the rumors about Kyra. Kyra had lived in this dorm before me. She was a gymnast, talented and bright, with a future full of promise. But last year, something happened. Late one night, she was found in the common room, lifeless on the couch. The authorities ruled it as a tragic accident, possibly a heart condition that had gone undiagnosed. Yet whispers among students painted a darker story. They spoke of Kyra's growing paranoia in the weeks before her death, how she'd confided in friends about feeling stalked by a shadowy figure. Her death left a lingering unease, a shadow over the dorm that no amount of time seemed to erase. Desperate for answers, I started digging into Kyra's life. I talked to her friends, professors, anyone who might know something. What I learned only deepened the mystery. A few weeks before her death, Kyra had become obsessed with an old urban legend about a watcher, a malevolent entity said to follow its victims, driving them to madness before ultimately claiming their lives. Most dismissed it as a silly tale, but the details struck an eerie chord. Kyra's friends described how she'd become withdrawn, her once vibrant personality replaced by a quiet dread. She'd started avoiding mirrors, refusing to be alone, and writing compulsively in a journal. I found that journal among her belongings. Reading it felt intrusive, like stepping into someone's most private thoughts. At first, the entries were normal, filled with notes about her classes, gymnastics practice, and plans with friends. But as the weeks went on, the tone shifted. Her writing became erratic, the words hurried and frantic. She described feeling watched, seeing glimpses of a shadowy figure from the corner of her eye, only for it to vanish when she turned to look. Her final entry chilled me to my core. "He's closer now. I can feel him. I don't know how much longer I can run." I couldn't ignore the parallels between her fears and the strange events happening around me. Was it all in her mind, or was there something real lurking in the shadows? One night, driven by a mix of fear and determination, I decided to return to the old dormitory, to the common room where Kyra had been found. The building had been cordoned off since her death, but I managed to find an unlocked side door. The air inside was cold and stale, carrying a faint mustiness of abandonment. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump as I made my way through the darkened halls. When I reached the common room, I froze. The couch where Kyra had died was gone, replaced by empty space. The walls, once vibrant with student posters and notices, were bare. I stood there, trying to imagine the events of that night. The room felt heavy, as though the air itself carried the weight of what had happened. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. My breath hitched as the sound grew louder, overlapping voices speaking in tones too low to understand. Then came the knocking, 3 soft knocks, just like before. My heart pounded as I turned toward the door. It was closed, but the sound persisted, steady and insistent. Summoning every ounce of courage, I opened it. The hallway was empty. Yet the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to come from all around me, an unsettling symphony of voices that made my skin crawl. I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then I saw it. At the end of the hallway stood a shadowy figure. It was tall and indistinct, like a void that absorbed all light. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Finally, as if released from a spell, I turned and fled. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air under the cold night sky. The following days were a blur. I tried to focus on my studies, to pretend everything was normal, but I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen. Worse, the strange occurrences followed me. The knocking continued, now at my new dorm. The whispers lingered, just at the edge of hearing. I started to feel like Kyra, constantly looking over my shoulder, fearing an unseen presence. The line between reality and paranoia blurred, and I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. I tried to confide in my friends, but they dismissed my fears as stress or an overactive imagination. "It's just the stories getting to you," one of them said. "You need to let it go." But how could I? The events were too real, too visceral to ignore. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't escape the feeling that something was always watching me. One night, desperate for answers, I turned back to Kyra's journal. I read and reread her entries, hoping for some clue I'd missed. And then I found it, a small note scribbled in the margin of one page. It mentioned an abandoned building on the edge of campus, a place Kyra had visited frequently in the weeks before her death. The next day, I decided to go there. The building was decrepit, its windows boarded up, and its exterior overgrown with ivy. Inside, it was dark and claustrophobic, the air thick with dust. As I explored, I found strange symbols etched into the walls, their meanings unknown. In one room, I discovered a makeshift altar, surrounded by burnt-out candles and what looked like offerings. A chill ran down my spine. Was this where Kyra had encountered the Watcher? As I stood there, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The temperature dropped, and the whispers returned, louder, and more distinct than ever. They seemed to call my name, beckoning me deeper into the darkness. Panic surged through me, and I ran, stumbling out into the night. It's been months since that night. The campus has slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but for me, the events are far from over. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear the knocks. I still feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me. And sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I see a shadow that vanishes when I turn to look. I don't know if the watcher is real, or if it's just the lingering trauma of what I've been through. But one thing is certain, Kyra's story didn't end with her death. It lingers like a ghost, haunting the campus and everyone who knew her. And maybe, just maybe, it's only a matter of time before it finds someone else.